Hello, guys and gals, me Mudahar, and I'm reporting to you from the dystopia we live in. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I realize that a lot of the stuff talked about this year has been very, very negative, but to be fair with you, I think with a lot of negativity, there is actually a lot of silver linings and positivity to look forward to. Let me just take my meds really quickly. And ladies and gentlemen, to give you an idea, this is a Nintendo 3DS XL. That was $186 a couple days ago. And I was like, did they figure out how to run a chatbot on this device? Now, I've been playing a lot of Resident Evil 5 Mercenaries 3D on this. It's crazy to think we lived in a time where game optimization allowed you to run goddamn Resident Evil Mercenaries on a 3DS. But times have changed. Ray tracing is a thing, and 30 frames per second is becoming the norm. Duplicated by fucking frame generation, and you get 60. Maybe 100. Anyways, but the reality is I think people are just lining up to get these 3DSs because they yearn for a pretty good system, even though for the same price you can get yourself one of these AIM Thors and experience those same 3DS games in proper style. But that being said, ladies and gentlemen, to get back to the story over here, this is not about the 3DS, okay? To give you an idea, our shit is getting so expensive. When it comes to PCs, I used to watch a lot of PC-centric channels on the internet, I really did. I'd always love watching, the gaming computer builds, but to be real with you, I've kind of fallen off a lot of it, mostly because, honestly, looking at how expensive computer prices are is, frankly, one of the most depressing fucking things, especially if you're a gamer like me. So if you look at the prices for some of these things, like 16 gigabytes of DDR memory, $49 in August 2025, by the end of the year, $189, oh shit! You ever wanted to get yourself a little hard drive, like a Western Digital Blue, not even the best, $45 back in August, it's affordable. $102, literally double the price increase. I love this shit, 64 gigs of memory. It used to be $190 in August 2025. I'm not even joking with you. It used to be that cheap to buy 64 gigs of memory. You might be like, whoa, what the fuck was I gonna do with 64 gigs of memory in my system, Muda? The question is, what are you gonna do now that it costs $800? It's goddamn insanity. But I could sit here and talk about these. I think that was the Microsoft assassin willing to find out because I'm about to mention Linux in this video. But to give you an idea, it's not really about the prices that are kind of the issue. Ultimately, I feel like we're headed towards a direction where a lot of these big gaming companies, or a lot of these tech companies in general, particularly I would say Nvidia, actually might enjoy that you buy less of their stuff. Because ultimately, gamers are getting less of the actual hardware delivered to them because we're losing the manufacturers, we're losing some of these big tech companies, and they're mostly filling their orders in for the big data centers and shit out there. I was reading somewhere that OpenAI literally just basically stole or grabbed or bought the most massive bulk order of actual RAM that you could find out there, basically starving out the competition. Now, this really isn't that big of a joke, too. OpenAI, which is by far one of the largest companies, or the guys that make ChatGPT, secured up to 40% of the world's DRAM supplies. That means the world, buckos. And basically what that means is they work with Samsung, SK Hynix, which if you remember, these are one of the three main companies that produce this kind of stuff. So here they brought approximately 900,000 wafers per month. Basically what it means is that this stuff is intended for something they call the Stargate Data Research Center, which, if anybody doesn't know, this is the US's literal military response to China, how the United States wants to be the #1 in artificial intelligence. And apparently they have a budget of $500 billion. Remember, this is your tax money. This is Uncle Sam's money. All of you contribute to the US government, and this is the money they're spending to be #1 in AI. So remember this, okay? The reason why AI is super duper winning right now and not gaming is because the US government basically backs all of these, they basically back this entire project. So the AI bros have effectively convinced the US government, and same thing going on in China, same thing going on in the big countries in the world, to basically spend an astronomical amount of money on this shit. And remember, there is no way in hell that you're winning economically in a battle of finances between with the US government. It's just not happening, okay? This country will spend so much money, it actually will blow your mind. You know, that because that's where we're at in this stage. So of course I saw this thing with like Nvidia where according to them, they were actually going to make it so that if you were going to be purchasing their Nvidia GeForce Now, which is cloud streaming, like basically where you rent a computer from the sky, starting on January 1st, Ultimate and Performance memberships have a high monthly max playtime of 100 hours. So obviously they said this change will impact literally less than 6% of people because you have to understand, right? Playing 100 hours a month is probably not feasible for most people. Like, you know, if you got life, kids, a job, all that kind of shit, probably don't even have a couple hours a week sometimes to game, depending on how extensive your shit is. But I always think this is the start of something really bad. You know, imagine now when we used to have like unlimited allowance, these services are not only asking us to give them $10 a month just to get the ad-free services, and again, they bill the ad-free because they're probably going to introduce options where, you know, you're playing a video game and all of a sudden you have to see like Blue Chew ads and shit. Yeah, that's the future that I love. That's the future that I crave for. So again, to purchase and rent these RTX systems, you have to pay like $20 a month. And that includes the shortest queue times, so you get in front of all the other people for your cloud gaming, 8-hour session lengths for anybody that wants to play decently long on their system, and of course access to all of those frame generation reflex technologies that, you know, people just use to get better. You know, instead of optimizing the fucking game these days, just generate the frames. So yeah, this is the stage we're at where we're literally just paying monthly for like gaming computers in the cloud. And I think for a lot of these companies, they might just enjoy the fact that, you know, people don't have access to actual hardware, meaning that they don't have actual access to the games and software that they own. Imagine if everything is stored up in the fucking cloud. Just imagine the DRM nonsense that you know, the whole stop killing games movement, which is actually doing pretty good, by the way, and we'll probably focus on that in the next couple days. But, you know, imagine we live in a world where, you know, we buy a video game and it's really just a license to a game that's hidden behind cloud server paywalls. Yeah, we're at a point where I wouldn't even doubt by the time GTA 7 comes out, we'll be gaming in the cloud, meaning that we won't even have access to a physical copy of that game or actually have the ability to run it locally, meaning that the games will never be able to get pirated, which is probably what these companies want. But that also means games, you know, will probably never be able to be modded because without having access to a file structure, it's just not going to happen. But again, this is obviously me looking far into the future in a very negative, pessimistic manner. Now again, am I wrong? I guess we'll find out in 10 fucking years. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, there is a bit of optimism that I see over here. Now obviously, with how expensive a lot of these things have become, to be completely real with you, it hasn't taken away my love for video gaming. Actually, I've been gaming more than I probably have been. I don't know whether it's like me waiting for Resident Evil 9 to come out, but these are the games that I've been playing recently, okay? As you can imagine, I have a pretty heavy focus towards survival horror. But a lot of these games are probably older than some of you people watching. Like, I'm pretty sure that there's some people who are watching this video that were born after the release of Half-Life 2, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Hell, I've been playing some of the older Resident Evil games on the PlayStation 1 of all things. Like, I whipped out the old, you know, system, emulated PlayStation 1 games on it and having a fucking blast playing video games. In fact, one thing that I've kind of realized is as expensive as these hardware prices have gotten, one of the things that like I've just done is kind of dug out older parts, put an older computer together, and actually just ran things like EmuDeck underneath it. Now, one of the cool things about this is that if you actually look into the Linux community, one of the big positives is that Linux distributions have been surprisingly growing as fast as they can. Now, I'm not going to say it's the year of the Linux desktop. That's a level of copium that even I can't fucking deal with on my channel, okay? But Bazite is one of those Linux distributions that I've showed you probably in the last like year or 2 years. I've actually been hyping this up for a fair bit. And basically, for anybody that doesn't know, it's one of the most gaming-centric Linux distributions where literally if you don't know anything about Linux and you just want to game off of Windows, download this distribution, install it on your computer, and it pretty much comes with everything you would ever need built right into the system. So if you want to play games like Sea of Thieves, Forza Horizon 5, life Marvel rivals, they work out of the box on a distribution like this. No command lines, none of that complicated nerd shit. It just runs your fucking games. In fact, probably faster than Windows, because literally all of the launchers you probably would ever need are built right into the thing. Now, the reason why it's been succeeding a little bit is that if you actually look at the amount of monthly visitors and the downloads to this, people have been downloading ISO files and obviously installing them onto their systems, obviously breaking themselves from Microsoft Windows. Now, whether it's because they can't upgrade to Windows 11 or they've just gotten so tired of Windows 11 breaking and forcing AI slop onto them that they have decided, I'm just going to count it quits and just switch over to Linux, which this is an amazing Linux distribution to actually go to. In fact, I pretty much install Bazzite on almost every single handheld gaming PC I own that isn't the Steam Deck. But obviously for me, like, my main distribution is probably CachyOS. But again, for people that literally just want to use Linux to game and they don't want to deal with any of the nerdy headache stuff, which I obviously understand, this is where you probably want to go with. And then of course, installing things like EmuDeck have made it where I have literally produced and made my own retro gaming box for, quite honestly, a fraction of the cost. You really don't need any crazy hardware to emulate games like Spyro the Dragon, emulate games like Resident Evil Code Veronica, which is pretty much all I've been playing for the last few days. Like, I've been on such a survival horror kick. And one of the things that I can kind of really appreciate is with a lot of older games, I genuinely feel like there are just older games in general that have not just more soul to them, but honestly just more, it's just more worthwhile playing some of these older titles, especially older games from generations that I missed out on, simply because, you know, as a kid, as a teenager, you can't just fucking buy every single game for all these older systems. And looking at the retro gaming community, there ain't no fucking way I'm going to the stores and buying like $8,000 Dreamcasts, you know, $300 copies of video games, when in most cases, a lot of these companies have went defunct and a ROM file exists out there easily to grab just if you want to play a video game, right? I'm not a crazy retro game collector. I'm somebody that actually plays video games versus coveting the fucking thing on my actual like shelf. I think one of the best parts actually about like some of these prices going up for a lot of the hardware is that I think for a lot of companies going forward, I think there's going to be more of a focus on things like optimization. Like, one of the things that I saw was, apparently because of how expensive just RAM alone is, forget the fact that SSDs are also going up in prices, it's made it so that it turns out a lot of those consoles, like the PlayStation 6 and whatever the future of the Xbox and Nintendo is, those are things that are going to be slowed down simply because obviously producing the hardware is going to come at such a significant cost where trying to sell that to the consumer in an economy like ours is just not that feasible. And I think it's actually a good thing because ultimately, even playing something like the PlayStation 5, I feel like personally it's a generation of gaming that hasn't actually made it anywhere, you know, to really show off its true potential yet. I feel like a lot of the games that I'm playing are simply just extensions of PlayStation 4 games with just higher resolutions and slightly better frame rates, if anything, right? Ultimately, I'm still waiting to see how beautiful games can really look when they exclusively are made for the PlayStation 5. You know, when you look at games like Grand Theft Auto 6 and Resident Evil Requiem, these are the only two games I'm necessarily excited for, and it's really just GTA 6 that feels like it's the one game that actually is using the hardware to its real, honest potential, right? Like, it's the only game that looks like it belongs on the PlayStation 5, and honestly, I haven't really seen any other game this generation, personally speaking, that's really blown my mind away. I think the closest thing might have been something like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and even that game felt like something that probably could have been ported onto the PlayStation 4 if the development team really wanted to push that there. But that's just my personal belief on the matter. Ultimately, at the end of the day, one of the biggest issues with these prices is where the world of artificial intelligence is going. Now, obviously, look, there's so much depressing shit we can say about AI. The amount of scams that have happened because of artificial intelligence has risen through the fucking roof. Let's not forget the fact that pretty much most videos that you watch, short form especially, are mostly AI generated slop. And anytime I see an AI generated video, I'll be completely fucking upfront with you. It turns me off so much because I know that's the reason why a stick of RAM costs more than gold these days is because somebody's rendering these goddamn fucking dog videos for literally every grandmother on the internet to watch to their heart's content. The amount of information that is constantly stolen and repurposed by these AI companies, while literally an actual like ISP will send me a letter in the mail simply because I downloaded a fucking video game from 20 years ago, is actually mind-bogglingly baffling to me. Like, it's one of those things that just kind of like radicalizes you in the most negative manner. But of course, with things like artificial intelligence, people are now fearing like, yeah, I'm gonna lose my goddamn job in the future. But then there's like a bunch of these utopia wanting nerds, especially tech bros, that are like, we're gonna live in an age of abundance where literally my only question is, if robots and AI are doing all these jobs, what the fuck are we going to be doing sitting at home? How are we actually going to be earning an income? What are we going to be doing? It's literally this crazy utopia that a lot of these tech bros have sort of pushed onto us. And whatever your views are on the AI bubble and everything, the effects that it's causing right now are just purely a net negative. When that bubble does burst, and burst it will, because plenty of these bubbles have come into the past and they've also burst, it's going to be a real reckoning that honestly the only way to really avoid it is to take your mind off things. And for me, a lot of that is just playing like older retro video games through the power of emulation, getting them running on a box that ultimately has open source Linux installed into it. I think in the future what's going to be interesting is seeing a lot of hardware crash down and a lot of e-waste generate too, simply because of the direction of some of these proprietary systems like Microsoft forcing users to go onto Windows 11 and cutting off a whole slew of users simply because of hardware restrictions on Windows 10. I think for a lot of people that are sitting with older hardware, using something like a Linux distribution to get the extra bits of performance and actually decouple themselves from these big tech companies is kind of going to be the big future. It's one of the things that I talked about like a couple weeks ago on my channel. Like, one of the things that I do want to kind of focus more on is teaching people about not just Linux, but also open artificial intelligence models, because I do understand we live in a world where now that this genie has been opened, there's no putting it back in the bottle, but there is a way of ethical consumption somewhat underneath this system. I also think when it comes to things like gaming, forget about the most modern stuff that comes out there. I feel like the last 2 years I've been fighting with every modern game for some bit of performance on my computer. And ultimately for me, it's just made me give up on a lot of modern releases. Like, again, the only games that I'm actually excited for next year is GTA 6 and Resident Evil 9. For the most part, most, if not all, my gaming are video games that are probably 10 to 15 years old, like Resident Evil 4, which somehow still looks absolutely jaw-dropping to this day, even running on an old PlayStation 2 or GameCube, where it's using literal megabytes of VRAM. I'm playing older games on the Xbox, the original Xbox. There was the actual leak, I shit you not, of Halo 2. Now, I wish I could show you some of this, but I'm pretty sure Microsoft would slit my throat on camera if I showed you any of these assets. Because, I've been just playing older stuff on the Xbox, the GameCube, the PlayStation 2, RPCS 3, heck, even PlayStation 4, which sooner or later will become retro. Just emulating stuff, running older games is pretty much where I'm at. And it's something that I think most people will probably have to start getting used to, or maybe they'll be incentivized to experience it simply because buying a new computer and experiencing new games might be something that is economically out of being feasible for a lot of people, right? Now, obviously, I'm kind of mixing gaming in with these videos, but that's kind of where I use most of like these higher end systems for anyways. Now, even for things like programming or like hobby stuff on the side, AI is something that I play around with maybe on a local sense, right? I actually do use artificial intelligence just to toy around with in a local setting. I run it locally on my home system. But looking at the future, I really feel like companies like OpenAI, and this goes for most of the AI companies, whether they're here or they're in China or they're anywhere else. As long as these guys are working on frontier models that are not locally running, not the local open-weighted models that anybody can download and run on one GPU, I do think that the future of a lot of this stuff, and I think the future of a lot of the billionaires that are running and funding this crap, necessarily want you to basically not have access to a computer. I really think this is not a conspiracy. I think for a lot of these guys, buying up all of this stuff and, putting it in one area is kind of a way to centralize computer processing and make it so that, if you want to use a computer or access things on the internet, you'll have to go through another layer of subscription services or be connected to these online artificial intelligences. And I think for a lot of people who don't really understand computers right now, they probably won't understand what the big deal is. But I think when you have all of your processing and storage and areas in one central location, controlled by one company that works hand in hand with the government, I think surveillance, I think user control, I think people's freedoms are completely at a line here. I think for a lot of people using a computer in the future in a local manner, if these companies are allowed to, have the level of the level of hardware they're seeking, the level of scale that they want to achieve, I really think that, for us, owning a computer and owning our own information is going to become more and more of a hobbyist thing. I'm not a fan of companies like OpenAI, as I'm not a fan of companies like XAI or any of these AI corporations, because I think they're all just working to centralize this stuff for themselves, leech a little bit off of the government, and ultimately make us spend an arm and a leg to have a little bit of our own personal computing at home. I think the personal computer, if the conspiracy theory in my head comes true, basically becomes the cloud shared computer that is ultimately overseen by these organizations. And that, to me, is a pretty scary future. And it's one of those things where I really hope this bubble crashes. I really hope at some point, not the government, because you can't trust the government. I really hope at some point the other investors, the billionaires that are putting money into this, maybe want their money back and they realize that, giving an unlimited war chest to a lot of these AI companies isn't actually the best economical feasible thing, right? Which at that point, a lot of this hardware does re-enter the market. A lot of this stuff does get shared, probably when some of these companies do face liquidation. But that's a big look into the future, okay? That's not even something that's a thing for 2026, let alone even 2027. But for, the next couple years, I think stagnation is going to be a word that I think people will have burned into their heads for the foreseeable future. And I sure as hell never in my career will promote you to ever jump onto cloud gaming, because I think renting your actual hardware, renting your games is bad enough, bro, but renting your consoles and computer, that's a whole new level of fucking you will own nothing and you will try to be happy mentality that I just cannot push. But ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just kind of stuff I wanted to yap about a little bit. We got 2026 around. Things are gonna get bad, but there's a couple actual positive glimpses that you can have. There's a couple ways to make things fun. Ladies and gentlemen, I am out.